Hey guys, my name is Jeff, and today we're checking out one of the best value off-road vehicles that you can buy new today, the 2024 Subaru Crosstrek. The Crosstrek comes standard with 8.7 inches of ground clearance and full-time all-wheel drive. Most new vehicles tend to be part-time all-wheel drive, but that's not all. This particular Crosstrek is the top-of-the-line Wilderness model, which actually comes with more ground clearance at 9.3 inches, full-time all-wheel drive, and even more changes, including a lower final drive and stronger rear differential to improve its off-road capabilities, which is what we'll be looking at today. The Wilderness starts at $32,000, and this one as equipped is around $36,000 that I'll be walking you through as we go through the exterior, the interior, the powertrain, and of course, we'll take it for a drive. So let's go ahead and start with the coolest parts of the Crosstrek Wilderness, the exterior and underneath, which has been improved greatly to improve the off-road characteristics of this Crosstrek. Now, this particular model is finished in crystal white pearl, which is this fantastic metallic flaky color that looks great in the sun. But we have to talk about that stance. I mean, just look how aggressive this thing looks. It really stands out in the parking lot. Now, this thing has an improved 9.3 inches of ground clearance. The standard Crosstrek's 8.7, as I mentioned earlier in the video, but here in the Wilderness, it's 9.3 inches of ground clearance. For reference, a mid-size pickup truck like the Toyota Tacoma has 9.4 inches of ground clearance, meaning this Crosstrek Wilderness is just 1/10 of an inch shy of a mid-size pickup truck, which is a considerably more expensive investment. And I think that's quite nice and tells you some of the capabilities of this Crosstrek. Now, some of the other things that leads to is the fact that this Crosstrek now has improved approach, departure, and breakover angles. Specifically in the front, we have a 20-degree approach angle and we have a 30-degree departure angle in the back. You can see it has a very sharp cutoff, and that'll help with a lot of things, especially with some of the other upgrades like the rear end, specifically the differential and the final drive ratio changes that make this capable of steeper grades. So this is quite a capable off-roader here right out of the box. You'll also notice that it has all of this black plastic and side cladding and armor that have been put on the exterior of this thing, and that is to help it with off-roading as well. Now, obviously you have this crystal white pearl paint job, but you don't want to ruin that by off-roading. There's all sorts of bushes and trees and other things that might scrape or damage your vehicle. So they've added this thick black cladding here on the exterior because in the event that you damage this is going to be way cheaper to replace than having to repaint an entire quarter panel. And so that's why you have it there, and you can see it runs from the front all the way down the side of the vehicle. But moving to the front of the vehicle, there are some other changes that are in fact Wilderness specific. If we get underneath, we also have a skid plate, which is a very nice feature, a functional feature. You'll note that we have these gold accents here in the front, the side, and even the roof rack. That is standard for the Subaru Wilderness trim models, and you'll find that those trim features are shared with the other models that have a Wilderness edition, like the Outback and the Forester. These headlights here are fairly standard looking for Subaru, but they are in fact adaptive headlights, meaning that they lead where the vehicle's going. So if you're turning, the headlights will turn to adjust and lead the vehicle. So if you're in the middle of nowhere where it's quite dark while you're off-roading, that is a nice feature to have to make sure you don't run into something when there's no additional lighting. You also get these LED fog lights, which are quite nice. And as we keep moving around here, we can notice these wheels. Now these are these 17-inch black off-road wheels specific for the Wilderness edition that are wrapped in these Yokohama Geolandar tires as you get it from the factory. And these, of course, are purchased specifically for the Wilderness edition to make it that much more capable. You'll also notice that you do get disc brakes all around on this vehicle, which is a nice touch. If we take a look, we have our Subaru Wilderness badge, our power adjustable mirrors, some more Crosstrek badging. You do actually get fobless, keyless entry here just on the front doors. You don't get it in the back. And over here, we have these roof rails that come standard and are rated for 165-pound load capacity. Of course, we get the tinted rear windows. As we come around to the back of the vehicle, we have our taillights, tons of ground clearance. You can even see some of the various suspension here in the back, which is quite nice. Crosstrek all-wheel drive badging, and even your hatch space, which isn't too shabby here. We go ahead and open it up. You can see there's plenty of room for camera gear. Not the most spacious, but it is a fairly compact vehicle. The other thing we should talk about is that this thing is actually rated for towing. This thing has a 3,500 pound towing capacity, in part thanks to having the larger motor. Now, I don't know how well this thing would do with 3,500 pounds hooked up to it, but Subaru says it's rated for up to 3,500, so you can tow at your own risk, or at least be able to carry a fairly small trailer if you're going to be off-roading or hanging out camping for a long time. But that's a quick look at the exterior and underneath of this very rugged off-road capable Crosstrek. So moving on to the interior, if we go ahead and open up the door here, we can see that we have this black interior that carries the Subaru Wilderness theme forward. Of course, we have these floor mats, the gold trim here, and even in the headrests, more Subaru Wilderness badging, which is quite cool. We also have this very unique material throughout the seats, and this is what Subaru calls StarTex. It's a water repellent, water resistant material that's supposed to be more durable to the elements. So perfect for an off-road themed Subaru Crosstrek, which should make it a little bit easier to keep clean and a little bit easier to clean should it get dirty. These seats, which are power adjustable and heated, do in fact have some nice side bolstering and some leg bolstering. But before we get too far into the interior and some of the tech specs, we have to check the fitment of the back. So moving into the back seat here, the Crosstrek has seating for 5. Obviously, the person in the middle of the back here needs to be fairly tiny, or fairly tiny overall for the people in the back. But let's humor me. We'll climb into the back seat here. Now, I am 6 foot even for reference, and as you can see here, my head in fact does not touch the roof, and my head's a little bit shorter. Obviously the hat makes it a little bit taller, but I'm quite impressed with that. And even here in the leg space room, my knees do graze the back of the seat with it set up for me, but if you had anybody taller, you could just put them in the front of the vehicle. I'm quite impressed and could definitely sit back here comfortably for a good amount of time. You also get some USB ports here in the center. Of course, they get their own windows and speakers, some cup holders. It's pretty nice here in the back of the Crosstrek. There's this sort of little bubble that gives you a bit more space, and you could easily access the back, including the fact that there's a little bit of a fold-down cup holder here if you needed to use it. But all in all, quite impressive here in the back seat of the Crosstrek. But let's go ahead and get back into the important stuff, which is the front of the vehicle. And you can also see things like this fake carbon fiber trim and a lot of our various window controls, power mirror adjustments, lock, all that stuff. So if we go ahead and climb into the Subaru Crosstrek Wilderness, go ahead and start it up with our power stop start button. You get your own Subaru Wilderness Edition animations here in front of the driver, which is a nice touch. And then here in the center, we have Subaru's essentially standard 12.3-inch display, which is basically like interacting with an iPad. But if you're familiar with any newer Subarus, you'll be familiar with this system. Wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, Bluetooth accessibility, navigation options, and of course, lots of extra Subaru options. Things like the X mode. The X mode is Subaru's off-road drive modes, and of course you get a variety of them here in the Wilderness. You get a snow and dirt mode, and you get the deep snow and mud mode. And what this is going to do is it's going to have the computer adjust the drivetrain for the Subaru to better adapt to some of these conditions. So I haven't needed to use anything like that even on the dirt here, but if you wanted to, it's there and it's available. So lots of cool features, including the driver assist adjustments, which the lane keep assist can be a little bit funky to me, but all in all, you can decide how you want to use those features. Lots of things that are available, including monitoring the diff temperature, all that stuff, which seems to be more important in terms of how seriously you want to take your off-roading. Here in front of the driver, you also get a smaller digital display. Now this can be adjusted. It'll show some of your SI drive modes here that you can adjust on the steering wheel. And of course, that's Subaru's adjustable drive modes to sort of change the way the vehicle handles, with S being a sportier mode. And of course, you have the more standard linear drive mode as well. You'll notice here that it has a lot of various features that you can adjust. Things like obviously your trip and your odometer. You do have a tach here on the left side with your temp. And then on the right side, you have a speedo with your fuel gauge. So fairly analog, fairly simple. It's going to be easy to approach for most people. Here on the steering wheel, we have quite a few different buttons. Of course, we have some of our cruise control adjustments and even our steering adjustments. And on the left side, you have a lot of your audio and volume adjustments. So pretty straightforward. One of the interesting things about the steering wheel, which is very nice, I might add, is the fact that we actually have these paddle shifters here. And that comes from something to do with the shifter. The shifter is nice and direct. It's a physical moving shifter, which I always prefer. I think it's easier to know what gear you're in. You can shift it quickly without even thinking about it. And there's never any fret. But if you flick it over here, you put it in the manual mode, which allows you to adjust these paddle shifters. Now, the Subaru Crosstrek uses a CVT, which is not a gear-based transmission. So the fact that you have these simulated gear shifting options is a little bit funky, and I assume that 99% of people who buy a Crosstrek are not going to use them. Anyways, moving on, we do have a wireless charger down here, and you can see we also have an aux cord in addition to more USB Type-C and USB Type-A connectors. We have the controls for the heated seats here with 2 settings. You have high and low. And of course, we have an electronic parking brake, 12 volt, 120 watt. We have not adjustable cup holders, so your mileage may vary with those, and you have some storage here in the back. We go ahead and look up top. We do, of course, have our mirror, which no camera here, but you do, of course, have a darkness adjustment. You have our controls for the roof and our various reading lights or map lights. And if we take a look at the actual visors here, they have a sort of rigid feature, but they are in fact lit, which is a nice feature. So there you have it. That is a quick look at the interior. It's going to be fairly standard to the higher trim Subaru Crosstrek models with just a little bit of extra flair for the Wilderness edition, but fairly standard here. So under the hood, the Subaru Crosstrek is offered with 2 different powertrain options. The lower trims get a 2-liter motor that is a little bit asthmatic, and the higher trims get this, what's in the Wilderness. It's a naturally aspirated 2.5-liter boxer 4-cylinder motor, good for 182 horsepower and 178 pound-feet of torque, which isn't a ton of power, but this thing's not the heaviest in the world. It weighs around 3,400 pounds and should do 0 to 60 in about 8.6 seconds, which is going to be just fine for cruising around in the city and doing most of what people will be doing with their Subaru Crosstrek. Now, these engines will all be paired with a CVT transmission, regardless of which one you go with, so that's a pretty standard thing for Subarus. And of course, you get the symmetrical all-wheel drive, which is a full-time all-wheel drive system, which is pretty unique to Subaru. Not many manufacturers go for that route. Most of the time, it's a part-time system that only kicks in when you need it, but not here in the Subaru, and that's going to help tremendously off-road. Now, some of the things they changed for the Wilderness, there's actually a stronger rear differential, which is a big deal, and they have a lower final drive ratio to help with off-roading. So this thing is supposed to be improved over the standard Crosstrek and be able to go up to a 38-degree grade and be able to climb things, which is pretty crazy, pretty cool that this vehicle is slightly better suited for off-road. But we should also talk about some regular use cases like fuel economy. So this thing has an EPA rated 25 miles per gallon city, 29 miles per gallon highway, and a combined rating of 27 miles per gallon. But that's pretty good, but it has a fairly sizable fuel tank of 16.6 gallons, which translates to the fact that if you take that combined number of 27, you're looking at over 400 miles of range, which is absolutely incredible. And if you plan on taking your Crosstrek places, that long range is going to come in handy big time. Now, one of the things I always like to check out is just how easy it is to work on this vehicle yourself. Now, a pretty standard boxer motor tribute would be having the oil filter at the top, which here it is. You have, of course, your engine oil check things, no CVT pulls because those are generally regarded as lifetime transmissions, but your engine oil check is here. Of course, the alternator's at the top. That's a good sign. Batteries easy to access. All of your fluids and everything, your filters and even your fuses are all really easy to access. So that's a good sign should anything happen while you're off-roading or if you like to take care of your own maintenance. But that's a quick look at the powertrain here in the Crosstrek Wilderness. So what's it like to drive the Subaru Crosstrek Wilderness? Well, really, it drives just like any other Subaru for the most part. Obviously, you have that full-time symmetrical all-wheel drive, which you'll never really notice any understeering or anything like that, but it's going to come in handy if you live off-road, plan on off-roading, or maybe even live in a snowy or rainy area. One of the biggest differences with the Wilderness, because it's a little bit taller, you might notice that the suspension feels like it sways a little bit more, and it might bounce a little bit more anytime you go over a speed bump or a bump in the road. And that's not a bad thing. That's pretty typical of things with more off-road tuned suspension, let's call it. And that's going to result in better performance off-road and just be a little bit bouncier on the road. But if you live somewhere that snows, for example, and the snowplows come in every year and dig holes out of the road and create massive potholes, well, this vehicle is going to be definitely more comfortable in those types of environments. And you'll also be able to fly over speed bumps. Not that I really encourage that, but that's just the type of stuff that comes with the territory category of a vehicle like this. It's obviously going to be better suited to off-road as well. As far as the regular performance, it's not a fast vehicle by any means, so don't expect to win any races, but it is just fine for touring around the city and will be fine in most regular off-roading conditions. Nothing too crazy like rock crawling, obviously. The CVT transmission does leave a little bit to be desired. It would have been nice to have something that could feel like a bit more responsive. Sometimes you get a bit of that rubber banding with the CVT, which is pretty typical, but it's really not that bad. I think it'll be just fine in 99% of driving conditions. Casual off-roading, you won't really notice it. It won't be a big deal as far as going from A to B. As far as the visibility, all of that is quite good, especially with the way that Subaru puts these windows and the A-pillars so far forward. They really don't obstruct your visibility at all, which is a great thing as far as safety goes. You have good visibility out of the back thanks to the compact nature of this vehicle, and that makes it fairly easy to drive. On top of that, the steering's not too bad either. Brakes, of course, work just fine. It's really a fantastic, easy vehicle to drive that won't leave you exhausted at the end of the day, but also very versatile, which is quite nice. There is a bit more road noise than some vehicles. You can get a bit of more bumps and even some wind noise. Obviously, the Harman Kardon system found here in the Wilderness can help overpower some of that, but it's not too shabby. I like it, all things considered. Really, it's a fun little vehicle to enjoy that you can also happen to take off-road at a moment's notice. So there you have it. That is a quick look at the Subaru Crosstrek, what I believe is one of the best value off-road vehicles that you can buy new today, especially here with the Wilderness, which has been upgraded separately from the Crosstrek to improve its off-road capabilities with a variety of different components, more ground clearance, that stronger rear end, lower final drive, more body cladding on the exterior, lots of different upgrades. But the question remains, which one do you buy? Well, in my opinion, I think the best models to buy are the ones with the big motor. That's going to be that 2.5 liter boxer. So the lower trims come with that 2 liter, which is definitely going to be rather asthmatic. The 2.5 isn't all the power in the world, but it definitely makes a difference. And if you live in a hilly area where you have to go a lot of steep hills, then this motor is going to help a lot more in those situations. You won't notice some awkward deceleration like you would with that 2 liter, especially with the vehicle fully loaded. But again, maybe you live in a flat area and you can get by with the lower base model. I think there's a lot of value there because you get the full-time all-wheel drive regardless of what trim you choose, which is fantastic value as far as I'm concerned. The CVT is not my personal forte, but I think it's going to be just fine for most people driving around town, and I have had no issues driving off-road with the CVT in any way, so all good marks on that regard. Now let's talk about the Wilderness specifically. The Wilderness features some really cool upgrades, as I mentioned earlier, but is it worth your money? Well, the short answer, I think, is yes, but no, because the thing is, this thing is really, really cool, but it's certainly not necessary. Most casual people that are going to be going on forest roads or going on light camping won't need the extra ground clearance. It won't make that big of a difference. The final ratio won't matter. If you're going to be using your Crosstrek off-road a lot, maybe you live off-road, maybe you're really going to beat on it and make sure you use all of this side body cladding that's been added here, then it's probably worth the money, not to mention all the other features that you get standard here on the Wilderness Edition, and the cosmetics make for a cool edition too, but you can always make some slight upgrades on your lower trim model if you wanted to. So that's what I think about the Wilderness. An awesome vehicle in its own right, but the Crosstrek as a whole is just an incredible vehicle. Now with that, that is going to be the end of the video. Feel free to throw some comments down below and let me know what you think about the Subaru Crosstrek, especially the Wilderness Edition. If you could throw that like button for me, I'd really appreciate it, and consider getting subscribed for more content like this in the future. With that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.